Hello and welcome to the Ultimate Freight Podcast. This is Joe Gianosa with Ultimate Logistics, here to navigate you through these choppy waters of the shipping world right now. And I wanted to start off with some numbers here. Retail sales have actually increased by 10% in March. And with this third round of stimmy checks coming out, and the pent up demand for products, consumption within the United States is expected to continue to grow as more people get vaccinated, things open up, and jobless claims keep on the downward trend. So something to look out for, and that definitely affects shipping rates as things come in from other countries and get imported into the United States. It takes trucks off the market. So speaking of the market, in the United States, nearly 50% of all refrigerated contracted freight is being rejected at this point, and carriers continue to chase higher paying loads on the spot market. So shippers are literally competing and bidding against each other, kind of like the real estate market right now. It's the same thing with shippers bidding to get their stuff moved faster. So, by the way, shippers in the Savannah, Little Rock markets are having rejection rates of over 80%. And Savannah, as we know, has a huge, as they're the number 3 port in the United States as far as volume goes. And we're seeing 70% rejection rates in places like Tulsa, Milwaukee, and Rock Island, Illinois. And then we got 50% in Joplin, Memphis, Kansas City, Ontario, and Los Angeles. Los Angeles is actually pretty high right now. And those are reefer carriers, refrigerated carriers, and they'll find a lot of opportunities down there in LA. So inbound spot rates are averaging $1 more per mile if you happen to be shipping out of the Georgia area, going down into Miami, into that South Florida. And it's crazy because there's actually starting to become more freight shipping out of Florida in general. And there's going to be more freight shipping out of Miami in general as well, but it's high going in and out right now. And that's how everything's getting affected right now. So it's actually $1 more per mile to go from, let's say, Atlanta to Miami. And I believe that's like 650-ish miles, almost 700 miles. I think it's right around 650. So shippers are paying an average of $650 more for that shipment this time this year compared to this time last year. And then Los Angeles outbound rates are going up. They were kind of steady a little bit, going up to Northern California, like we were talking about, how produce season is starting to boom out of NorCal. You're starting to see more loads come out of Northern California to Southern California. So that typically affects the rates coming out of LA going up. And most of the time, every other year, we've seen a flip-flop of rates where Los Angeles to Northern California would actually be less expensive in the summertime during the peak of produce season compared to northern to southern. However, we're seeing such massive influx of shipments being brought into the United States. The main port into the United States for those kind of shipments is Long Beach. So we're seeing so many people adding product to their homes and buying more things online, and the retail sales is up quite a bit. So we're seeing that pent up demand and just more and more product being shipped in to Los Angeles. So I don't think we'll see that correction happen. It's kind of evening itself out. I don't think we'll see that correction happen until the pent up demand is done. So it's actually load volumes out of LA week over week, just from last week to this week, is up over 9% higher. And let's see, there are still pent up demand for goods, like I said, in Asia, stuff coming out of Asia and hitting those Long Beach ports. So watch out for that. And it's really taking trucks off the market. Like we said before, usually they go on rail But since everything's behind and you have that demand, they're using trucks for that. The other thing to look out for too is just as a buyer of retail goods, the pent up demand is so huge that it's going to start upping the rates on consumer goods and products. So you'll see a little bit of an inflationary spike on the products and the transportation that it takes as well, especially with the ocean freight coming in. So I wanted to go over something here, which is I usually go over a topic every week that has to do with trucking. And I wanted to go over driving hours. Back in 2019, we switched over to electronic logbooks and to make the roads a little bit safer. Guys were, writing in their, keeping handwritten logs and things like that. Sometimes they'd keep a couple of them. They were seeing accidents. So the Department of Transportation and Safety Administration decided to step in and make these rules. And they've changed a little bit since then over the last couple of years. But I want to give you the gist of it, because if you're a shipper and you're shipping product anywhere, you'll want to know, okay, how long is my facility taking, or facilities I'm choosing to work with taking, to load drivers and get them out of facilities when they're, either loaded or getting unloaded? And how does that work with shipping hours and our driving hours and the legality of everything? So I want to go over these with you so you kind of get an understanding of what's going on. So drivers can only drive up to 11 hours total per day. 11 hours. Typically, guys, they're planning out their day. They typically want to stop at 10 and a half, because they have to choose which truck stop to go to. They might not have a viable option. If they're out in the middle of nowhere, they usually stop between 10 and 11 hours of service, because right when that 11 hours hits, they have to stop like wherever they're at. And that has to happen within a 14-hour window. So drivers can be on or be working for 14 hours a day and can drive 11 of those hours. And nothing can extend that 14-hour window. So if a driver starts at 4 a.m. and they're on duty, those are called on-duty hours. So if they're on duty starting at 4 a.m., and that could be from the time they leave their yard to go pick up the product. It doesn't start when they're loaded or when they get to a shipper. It's the amount of driving hours in total that they're driving. So right when they turn that truck on at the yard to go to a location to pick something up, that's when that clock starts. So let's say they start that truck up at 4 a.m. They have to be done by 6 p.m. that same day, sharp. And after a driver drives for 11 hours or is on duty for 14 hours, they have to take a 10-hour reset. So they have to be resting and be good to go for the day ahead of them. So the driver must take a 30-minute break within the first 8 hours of driving. And most guys take their first break within 5 or 6 hours on the road. And the break can happen while on duty, like getting gas or something like that. But as long as they aren't driving in those 30-minute time increments. And drivers have to take a 34-hour reset if they have been on duty for 60 hours in the last 7 days or 70 hours in the last 8 days. I mean, that's a lot of work right there. And so thank a driver if you ever, come into contact with one, because they are working hard to get our stuff moved around. So, but understand that when you're booking freight, either directly with a carrier or you're using a broker, you want to make sure that if it's a long haul, that they're fresh on hours so that they can get there in time. And if you're booking with a broker, they should make sure of that themselves. But they have to turn off and completely be done working for 34 straight hours if they hit those benchmarks there. And by the way, drivers can add 2 hours to their driving hours and 2 hours to their on-duty hours if there are unforeseeable driving conditions or adverse driving conditions. So if there's a huge accident and they're just stopped on the freeway for multiple hours at a time, then they can add a couple of those hours. If there's a weather event that's not typically normal, that's unforeseeable and they couldn't do anything about it, they can add a couple of hours. Now, if they're in a snowstorm in Buffalo in the middle of January, that wouldn't count because that's typical that time of year. That's not unforeseeable. So there is some leeway there. They can also split up their hours if they want to. Let's say they can split up their 10 hours of rest between 2 different days. So they can hit 3 hours off duty and then use that to stop their 14-hour clock. And then the other 7 hours that they need to sleep, they can go in the sleeper. Let's say if they get to a receiver and they get there after the appointment time and they're closed, or maybe they're really backed up and they don't want to use their on-duty hours, they can actually just turn off, go in their sleeper and sleep at the shipper or at the receiver, and that'll actually count for their off-duty hours. It all just depends. They laxed up the rules a little bit back in September of last year to where they can actually split up their hours a little bit, those 10-hour resets, and split it up to make it a little bit easier. So those are some rules for driving. When you're a shipper, you typically, if you're factoring in how long it's going to take to get your shipment from one place to another, a full truckload, let's say you're coming out of the Bay Area and going to New Jersey, you want to factor in 500 miles a day for the truck. Don't go on Google and see, oh, well, here's how long a regular car, that's what Google's going to give you. If you just type in one city to another, that's what Google's going to give you, is what it usually takes a car to drive that amount of time. But you typically want to look at 50 miles, 500 miles a day, or 50 miles per hour average. That's how long a driver can usually drive nowadays with the driving standards that there are. If you book a team, then obviously they're just switching off and you would go 1,000 miles a day at that point, or sometimes even more. But you have to factor in the fact that trucks are typically cruising at 65 miles an hour. They're not like me driving in the left lane, 80 miles an hour constantly. And they have to stop for gas. It's a big ordeal to stop for gas. It takes a long time to do that. It's not like when we stop for gas. So anyway, it's usually 500 miles a day that you can count on. Some guys are a little bit better than others, but that's what I would average it out at. So anyways, thank you for listening today. And those are some tips and tricks for you for shipping out your freight. I will come back at you next week with a freight market update. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, joe@ultimatelegisticsinc.com, or visit our website at ultimatelegisticsinc.com. See ya.